Hey, welcome back to the Caroline Community Conversation. Today we have a special guest here at our 5 o'clock time slot. I'd like to introduce, and this is a long resume, so bear with me, but when you have accomplished this much, you get to hear it all. So I'm sure I won't capture it all, but I'm going to give it a good darn effort. Here we go. Terry Goddard's with us today. He was born and raised in Tucson. He's actually the son of a governor of Arizona, Samuel Goddard. Goes from a long lineage of civil servants. His great-grandfather was actually he was the Secretary of State in Illinois. Terry graduated from Harvard. He served active duty in the U.S. Navy. When he came back to Arizona, he made up for being born in Tucson, and he got his JD degree from Arizona State University. 1982, he led a successful push to get the city council to go to an election of districts rather than at large. Then he served 4 terms as mayor of Phoenix, right? 4. Yeah. And he then had an unsuccessful run for governor. He has been the attorney general here in Arizona and ran under a clean elections program and was reelected to the attorney general in 2006 through 2010. He actually ran for Secretary of State, came up a little short on Michelle Reagan, and then just in 2018 was elected to the Central Arizona Water Conservation District of Maricopa County. And you know what? The man is pretty much the granddaddy of outlaw dirty money, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, all right. I don't know how you sit that long when people introduce you, Terry, but how are you today, my friend?
We're doing very well, thank you, in spite of everything going on around us.
Yeah. Is your family safe and happy and healthy?
They have been. Very proud that my son just graduated from ASU either yesterday or today. We're not quite sure, but we watched 2 virtual commencements, and it was a little light on pomp and ceremony, but lots of pride.
Yeah, well, congratulations to him. And the ceremony is not half of it, right? It's just a small little taste, what he does with that degree. And he went to ASU, so good for him.
There you go.
All right. So, Terry, you and I have talked before. You are the epitome of a civil servant. And quite frankly, you and I align on many of the issues. We're both Democrats, so that's not. But I want to be clear. You being on this show is not an endorsement of my candidacy in any way. You are here to fill the space with knowledge. So let's get right down to it. Tell me the state of outlaw dirty money right here in the 2020 election. Where are you guys at?
Well, we were where we're at. Where just about everybody is in a suspended animation. Basically, back on the irony of this year, 2020, in terms of politics, and you're right in the middle of it, is that so much good intention and hard work came to a grinding halt in the middle of March. And for us, we had our best day ever circulating petitions on the 17th of March. You may remember that as Election Day or St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
And the next day, because of the pandemic, we had to suspend all person-to-person contacts. And that means any efforts to get a signature had to be stopped for a couple of reasons. Obviously, I think everybody's aware, but the first one that we were concerned about is obviously public health. We didn't want to be out there moving something that could arguably be moving the virus. And we were specifically concerned about our volunteers, many of whom are over 65. And that puts them right in the target area for the maximum vulnerability. So we really felt that the only responsible thing to do was to suspend the campaign. Yeah. That hurt. We have, and I have now in possession, 275,000 signatures. We started on the 27th of March of last year, and we've been grinding away ever since. And as a result, we were in absolutely great shape to get Outlaw Dirty Money initiative on the ballot for the 2020 election. I had no doubt that we were going to make it. Everything was lining up perfectly. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and we are where we are today, which is suspended, waiting to see what happens. But as time goes away from us, it becomes harder and harder to meet the target. We still needed about 100,000 more signatures, close, but the target has to be 357,000 signatures. And that was that's where we were about to get, and now it looks like unless things suddenly return to normal, and I just don't see that happening, we're going to have to swallow hard and say this was a valiant effort and a very noble one, but we don't see how we can get enough for by July the 2nd, which is the deadline.
Yeah. And I'm really excited to talk to you. And I know a lot about this. For those of you just joining us, we're talking about one of Arizona's gems here, Terry Goddard. Put your questions into the Facebook feed, and Andy Gomez, campaign manager of our deal here, will put it into our Zoom, and we'll try to get your questions answered. Terry, I kind of jumped the gun a little bit because I'm really excited to talk about this. You have marketed dirty money and dark money so well. For people who are not kind of as with it as you and I, because I'll put us both in that same category, tell me, could you tell the viewers a quick synopsis of what exactly the petition is? What exactly?
This petition drive is about stopping the anonymous political contributions, excuse me, phones have to be turned off, which have inundated the country. I think everybody has heard about dark money. Anonymous political cash, which comes in through a legal but I think highly suspect avenue, the 501c4 nonprofit organization. It's not a PAC. It's an advocacy nonprofit, which under IRS rules and under Arizona law can operate under the radar screen. They don't have to disclose anything. They can spend unlimited amounts of money on politics, on trying to convince you and me and everybody else to vote one way or the other in an election. But they don't have to say who it is that's behind the money. You do get one disclosure, that is the most recent checkbook, which is usually one of these nonsense named nonprofits. You've seen them, I think, Americans for a Better Everything, or a Wonderful Day, or Peanut Butter. They don't say
Hot Five Sunday. Hot Five Sunday. Yeah.
They don't tell you a thing about what it is that's being advocated or who's doing the advocacy. And here in Arizona, we probably have the most permissive, in fact, we do. We have the most permissive ability for contributors to hide their identity of any state in the country. Our legislature, we hope you and others are going to be able to change that soon, basically have said, if you want to spend money in politics in Arizona, go ahead. Roll up your sleeves, and we're not going to ask any questions. So the law in our state says, if you're a 501c4, if you're one of these dark, or I think they're dirty money operations, you can spend unlimited, and you don't have to have a local address. You don't have to have a chairman. You don't have to have any of the things that candidates have to have in order to run. You just spend money, and organizations from the time Citizens United opened the floodgates for corporate cash in 2010, organizations have been using this loophole to inundate Arizona. And I think everyone's well aware, in 2014, a local utility company, whose name will be at least temporarily left out, decided that they wanted to have control of the Arizona Corporation Commission, an elected position, statewide office. And they spent over $10 million to elect 2 members to the Arizona Corporation Commission. We now know that because one of the people who got beaten in that election, Sandra Kennedy, came back in 2018 and got elected again to her old seat and demanded transparency, demanded that APS, I'm sorry, I stole it, say that they had what they had done to influence the election. And that's where the number 10.7 came out 5 years after the money had actually been spent to convince Arizona voters, unfortunately, to elect a puppet, 2 puppets, who would then do the bidding of the organization that got them in office. That's like buying a seat in a democratic system, and it's totally unconscionable. And I believe one of the ways we can get that stopped is by standing up as citizens and saying, we must change our law so that all money that is seeking to influence votes the original source has to be disclosed. And that's what the Outlaw Dirty Money initiative would do.
Yeah, wow. I have to say that you kind of talked all over that thing, and it's really something, but if we kind of break it down to one thing, the initials APS, when they bought their corporation commission seats, spending over $10 million, basically they said, we're going to put in people that will give us a rate increase. I am an APS customer. I don't have a choice. I have to pay them what they say, or else I don't have electricity. They then take my money and use it to buy people that will then increase my costs. And then it goes this crazy little triangle. All right, so when I'm a teacher, I ask my students who get in fights, I'd say, okay, son, tell me what happened there. And he says, well, he did this, he did that. Okay, I'm going to talk to the other kid. Before I do, why don't you tell me what you think he's going to say? I need you to tell me, why are people against this? What is APS going to say is the reason why they should remain anonymous?
Well, I've thought about that a lot. Obviously, I've been in debates for the last several years about why you should have full disclosure. And there have been folks on the other side who have said, no, you shouldn't. And they basically say there is a right to privacy here, which big donors should exercise. And therefore, they have a right to remain secret, the right to hide, in essence. Now, that's their argument. You asked me to give the argument. It's a bogus argument because there is no right to hide in our Constitution. The Supreme Court has said over and over again, before Citizens United and actually in Citizens United, that Supreme Court under Justice Kennedy said the plaintiffs in this case, Citizens United, have claimed that it would chill their free speech if they have to disclose who their donors really are. And Justice Kennedy said, and I applaud him for this, the other 2/3 of the opinion I think are terrible, but he said in the opinion that even if it did chill their speech, and he said there was no proof that it had, it would not be sufficient to overcome the right of the people to know where the money came from. So the Supreme Court has said over and over again, no right to hide if you're a major contributor. And I think that's absolutely fundamental. So this so-called right to privacy that Goldwater Institute and others keep talking about doesn't exist in the Constitution, doesn't exist in the Supreme Court rulings in this area. And frankly, it doesn't exist in Arizona. Think about it for a minute. If anybody wants to support your campaign for the legislature or any campaign, and they spend over $50, they have to give their name, address, and their employer. That's full disclosure. That's all we're asking for the mega buck contributors who are behind the dark money schemes. Just do the same thing that every other contributor to a political cause in Arizona has to do already. So it's nothing new. It's simply trying to level the playing field and have everybody playing by the same rules so that a really rich person or a big corporation can't come in and put millions of dollars trying to put their finger on the scale so that their will prevail in the election. And I just think it's basic common sense. And the point is driven home over and over again. We've done a lot of polling. You know, you can't be in politics today and not spend some time polling. And the first one I saw was in 2016. In 2016, approximately 87% of Arizona voters said, yeah, we'd like to have full disclosure. A little more on Democrats, fewer on the Republican side, but basically equal. This is not a Republican or Democrat issue. It's one that all folks in the political who think about it say, yeah, there should be full disclosure. And then we've had 2 elections that tested this proposition. One was in Tempe, and I still look at it with awe. 91.7% of the people of Tempe voted in favor of full disclosure, a proposition that was modeled on our Outlaw Dirty Money initiative. And then Phoenix had a similar one later that same year, and 85% of the voters voted in favor. This is not something that there is responsible opposition to. There are a few very special interests, and there's a majority of the legislature right now who want to allow big money to hide. But the people of Arizona don't want that.
And that's the strangest dichotomy right there, you know?
Hey.
So those people that don't want it and the sunlight, you know, they're kind of like Dracula over there, right? I wonder if garlic would actually be put around their neck, that they'd have a problem as well. But let's say we do have sunlight. We had it in Tempe. We had it in Phoenix. The folks that are against disclosure, they're all for local control, right? So, I mean, they just let that go.
No, they're not. That's a really interesting point. As soon as Tempe did what they did, which, as we have noted, was overwhelming and absolutely unequivocal, the legislature, within within the week, if I remember correctly, came in and did what we call preemption. And it was not during the time that bills could be introduced. So they first had to have a striker, which is a difficult legislative maneuver. In other words, you take one bill that's already been introduced, you strip all the words out of it, you introduce something else. In this case, the striker was that local governments would be prohibited from doing anything that required extra obligations from any nonprofit corporation. Well, as I made clear, I hope at the beginning, the vehicle for dirty money are 501c4s, nonprofit corporations that are advocacy groups. And some C4s, let me emphasize, are very legitimate organizations. They've been around for a long time. But an awful lot of them were formed after Citizens United specifically to hide contributors. And what Arizona legislature did, and as a majority passed, was a preemption of Tempe and any other city who had the temerity to come out and say, we think nonprofits, if they're going to be involved in politics, if they're going to try to influence votes, should disclose their original donors. They basically said cities can't do that. Now, there's a legal issue, but as of right now, Phoenix, Tempe, and any other city that tries to do it is technically prohibited by vote of the legislature. So much for local control, so much for believing in the sanctity of the government closest to the people. They basically tried to preempt the result. Now, they were so wrong in doing that, but it was a knee-jerk reaction to protect their big secret contributors.
Wow. I mean, that for people paying attention, this is the one that just drives them crazy. It drives me crazy. This is one of my major planks of my campaign. I feel like with Citizen United, while I don't agree with it, that is the law of the land. It's been decided. We should be able to know who's trying to buy our politicians, because that's what it comes down to.
Oh, yeah.
And if you want to buy them, okay, put your money up, but you ought to put your face behind that money and just let us know. We have a right to know. I feel that the American public, and especially here in Arizona, we're smart enough. So
that's
yeah,
why I have such a hard time with your question, because sometimes you have to say there is no responsible contrary opinion. And I think this is one of them. I think basically what has been argued in favor of non-disclosure is such a weak, I think, nonsensical argument, especially given the fact that you and I and everybody else that contributes to politics as individuals have to do full disclosure already. It's only the big cats, it's only the corporate entities and a few very large contributors that they want to exempt. So it's not about an equal playing field. It's not about fairness. It's not even about privacy. It's about special privilege. And I don't see how you can, with a straight face, how you can argue in favor of that.
Right. So one of the things with Kathy Hoffman tomorrow, we talk about how the legislature isn't funding the proper oversight of the ESA program, right? So we have money going to people in the college. They have people buying trips to Hawaii. We know that there's malfeasance. And yet the legislature doesn't want to, these fiscal stewards that they call themselves, the fiscal conservatives are just saying, hey, take this money that is taxpayer money and have at it. The same people who say they're for law and order don't want background checks on all guns. The same people that say that they are for local control will come in and then abscond local voices. I mean, it's beyond the pale.
There you go, trying to be consistent. It just really, that's a weakness.
Yeah. Well, we're talking with Terry Goddard. Yes. We're calling here on Terry Goddard, the godfather of Outlaw Dirty Money, as I like to say. We're changing it all the time. Please type in your questions. We'll try to get them to Terry. Hey, take me back to the election of 2018. Here's a case where you actually had enough signatures. It looked like the people were going to get to speak. Who shut us up, Terry?
Well, indirectly, it was the legislature. Their agent was the courts. But basically, what the legislature passed in 2017, the year before, was a series of anti-initiative laws. And there's no other way to characterize them. They put in something called strict compliance. Nobody knows what that means, but they said that any initiative has to be strictly construed by the courts. And that caused a lot of concern. They also put in the one that ended up being the problem for Outlaw Dirty Money, which was that any paid petition passer, this is just for paid people, we had some, who is subpoenaed to show up at a hearing and doesn't show up, will have all of their signatures disqualified. Now, I had a little problem with that just to start with, which is, okay, we in Arizona have a constitutional right to petition our government. It was in our Constitution back in 1912 when it was first ratified. It's fundamental to this state, that right, that constitutional right for initiative, recall, and referendum. And basically, my signature and your signature, if it's on a petition and the circulator messes up and doesn't show up at a hearing, the penalty is not to penalize the circulator, but to penalize the person exercising their constitutional rights. I just think that's wrong. Okay, we lost that argument. I think difficult to explain, but we did. The second part of this particular statute was, it says the subpoena is a legal document that says you have to show up in court. And normally subpoenas under federal laws, under state laws, are very specific in saying you've got to give the potential witness all kinds of notice. And they have to have reasonable time to show up. They have to know what the situation is. You've got to give them backup dates if, in fact, they have a reasonable conflict. And in the statute that tries to disqualify signatures, however, all it says is you need to go to the address that that person gave to the Secretary of State when they first registered. It's called their service of process address. And if they're an out-of-state individual, they usually gave the address of their employer. That makes sense. So in our case, the address of the employer was on the 9th floor of a business down on Central Avenue. And so I personally kept an eye on that particular suite, thinking that they might try to drop off some service of process at the new tenant because the original person who hired the signature gatherers had left. So I was watching. And so we thought they might try a sneaky attack to do the service of process, because the statute doesn't say that you have to give notice to the potential witness. It just says you have to take a subpoena to the last known address, the one that they gave at the Secretary of State. What we didn't know, and didn't know until the time of the hearing, was that they snuck in on a Saturday and they dropped these 14 subpoenas on the security guard in the building. Never tried to go to the original address, never went to the suite where they used to occupy, and never checked to see if that security guard had any authority to receive the paper. Of course they didn't, but we didn't know until they showed up in court and started calling the witnesses. No time to find the security guard, no time to basically resurrect our case, because these cases are done very fast. And so the bottom line was 10,000 of our signatures got dismissed. We were close enough to the wire that ended up putting us at about 1,000, almost 2,000 signatures below the line you needed to have. So we were that close to being there. I think we should have been on the ballot, but then the Supreme Court ratified that decision with a misinterpretation of the record. They basically said, we knew that these people had been subpoenaed. We didn't. And so they let it stand. I'm still pretty mad about it. I think it was a miscarriage of justice, but let's get back to the fundamental proposition, which is the legislature has done everything in its power with the current majority to try to make our constitutional right to have initiatives, referendums, and recalls as difficult as possible. Everything from strict compliance to requiring every petition be notarized, to requiring this business about everybody who is paid has to give a service of process address. And, oh, by the way, as you probably know right now, in this pandemic, we can't get electronic signatures, something that candidates can get, but nobody trying to get an initiative, a law put on the, from the people. They can't use electronic signatures because the legislature doesn't want to make it easy for somebody to actually exercise their constitutional rights.
Mind blowing. I just can't understand. See, here's the thing, Terry. I want to say this, especially for my buddy Bob Gomez, who's watching, and he says you're a good guest. He's a Republican.
On and on about subpoenas, I'm sure.
No. He's a Republican. I don't hold that against him. I have a lot of Republican friends. I mean, I have a lot of people that I respect who are Republicans. I just don't see how they support the people that they elect. That's the problem. There are plenty of good Republicans that they could elect, but we're electing these people that want to play by separate rules. So when you talk about Jay Lawrence can get signatures online. Jay Lawrence can pay anybody to get his signatures. They don't have to show up in court. Why do we, as the people with constitutional rights, have to have them trampled in a separate system for the two different ones.
Let me try to be very brief. We did a list. I think we ended up with 16 specific differences between a citizen initiative and the requirements for getting signatures there, which are not required of a candidate running. And it seems to me they ought to be the same. Let's have parity. Let's say that if you're a candidate trying to get signatures and you're a citizen trying to get signatures on an initiative, you ought to have the same rules.
Well, not only that, but they appoint the justices. And I know you're a man of law. I know you're a lawyer. I know you held the top spot here in Arizona. But just recently, Clint Bolick's wife had listed on her signature petition that she had a residence that was a postal box, where it specifically says that you cannot do that. And yet when she went to court, it wasn't like, oh, no, it was more like, okay, you can still stay and play with us. You can still be in the game. You've fouled out, but you can still, it's just amazing.
I would differ with you on that one simply because we do protect the justice's home address. And I think, although the law, I think, is clear, I mean, she should have given her home address, but because her husband's a justice on the Supreme Court, I actually think that one was permissible. So I have a slight difference.
And I appreciate that difference, Terry. And one of the questions I will ask you is about fighting. But listen to me here. There's a way. There's actually a waiver. There's a waiver that she could have put. She could have gone to the Secretary of State and made the plea, and it would have been acceptable, in my opinion. You know the rules. You want some kind. Yeah. You know. Look, we can fight dirty over this, Terry, if we have to. But yes, I get your point. I would be more than happy to say, Shauna Bolick, you don't have to give your address because of your husband's a judge, but you have to kind of say that up front, and we give you that right. Right?
And you know, living in that post office box is very confining.
Oh my gosh. And the meals suck. Talk about room service. Hey, Rose Smith's also talking about she's running for school board and you can't get electronic signatures for school board, which is kind of silly.
Well, I think, you know, they basically opened it up. And here's another issue. I'm sure you have plenty, but they a number of years ago, the legislature did say that local candidates, and I would assume that would include school board, could use electronic signatures, but it has not been implemented, and the legislature hasn't provided the funds to be able to set up that system.
Well, I know our friend Katie Hobbs has just put it in place where some county candidates can actually get signatures online now, which is really very nice.
Why not? Why not have mail
It's
ballots?
much more secure.
I mean, this is not an obstacle race. This is a democracy that we're running here. And it seems to me that whatever can fairly be provided to make the exercise as accessible as possible is something that we ought to all stand behind.
I love the way you put that, an obstacle course. I'm going to talk about just a moment because we have a speed bump in 23 by the name of Jay Lawrence. And I'll tell you right now, when I'm elected, if I'm privileged to serve, I will tell you that I will put that dirty money right in the hopper where it needs to go. We're going to outlaw that. We're going to do some things that the people want. So while it might be sad that you, Terry, might not have a petition that goes on the ballot, look, we're either going to get something that's going to be passed in law, or we're going to be able to refer something to the ballot so that you don't have to go out there and get 500,000 signatures.
Well, and I'm still hopeful that we might be able to get this thing going, but every day that goes by, it is more difficult. And frankly, I don't want our volunteers to have to try the impossible. They've got other things to do, as we all do. But the bottom line is what we may ask, and this would come to you as a legislator, is to see if there could be a one-time exception, not changing the rules in any way, but recognizing that there's a pandemic going on. This is a once in a century or millennia type of activity, and it has changed the rules. And we shouldn't have to give up our constitutional right to petition the government because we're being respectful of the public health emergency that we're in right now. So one of the things we're going to ask the governor soon is, and this would come to the legislature, is whether or not we could grandfather the signatures that we have. We're sitting on 275,000 signatures. A lot of Arizonans have said we want to see this outlaw dirty money proposition on the ballot. And so maybe we could use those signatures with legislative permission against the next election in 2022. That way, nobody goes out and risks their life and limb to get a signature, and no citizen is in danger. But the bottom line is our constitutional rights aren't run roughshod over either. I think it's fair, and we're going to be making that request very soon.
Yeah, and I think if there's a silver lining there, I think there are going to be many silver linings to the current pandemic that we're experiencing. But I think when we come out of this, I'm hopeful that we're going to get a legislature that's going to work together, that's going to kind of be a little bit more old school, where they're respectful of each other, but argue like heck over the issues, and then come together for the good of Arizona. I hope we can make you proud. Bryn DeFusco, a friend of ours, asks what advice you have for me to get elected.
Work like hell, keep doing these programs. I think it's a wonderful accommodation for the times that we're in today, and I applaud you for it. I know you've had some great, current company accepted, but you've had some great, and a lot of meaningful conversation about real issues, which is something we need to see. But bottom line, you've got a district which has got some of the great leadership in Arizona living there. You've got incredible geographical diversity from Tortilla Flat to North Scottsdale.
Right.
And it represents the soul of Arizona. And I think you'd be perfect for it because it's a place of integrity. It's a place of, let's just say, folks who don't want to be put in a box, in a category. And
in a postal box.
In a postal box, absolutely. But 23 is an interesting challenge, and I think a very inspiring one. And you came so close last time, so I wish you all the best. And you told me I couldn't endorse anybody on this program, but I think you bring an awful lot to this table, and I wish you very well.
You go ahead if you have to. Oh, that's great. Hey, we're going to kind of wrap things up. We try to get a little personal, a little bit of fun questions going here, so we get to know the man, get to know the Godfather. So would you would you answer a couple of silly questions?
You can't afford to refuse, right?
Hey, before I do, while I have everyone's attention, tomorrow we have Kathy Hoffman on at 5 o'clock, Superintendent of Public Instruction. Great conversation. Thursday, I think a lot of people want to tune in for this one. Stacey Gabriel, who is an employment lawyer, is going to talk about kind of opening up and the liability involved in Arizona right now. It's a really hot topic. And then we're going to have the president of the Scottsdale Parent Council, along with her artist sister, the Ackerman and Palace group, on Friday, which will be fun. Okay, Terry, you ready? Okay. So here's one. What cartoon or guilty pleasure show do you still watch? What's on your TV?
Well, now that Longmire has been, I think we've gone through it twice. But right now we're watching something called Terriers, which is questionable. And we really like Bosch, which is, I think, one of the best detective shows I've ever seen.
All right. Okay. So what one ridiculous life goal did you have or you still have?
I have no ridiculous life goals. It's
all business. All right, Sarah, we were just about to fight before. If you got in a barroom fight, what music would be on the jukebox?
Oh, in a barroom fight?
Yeah.
It wouldn't be Hail to the Chief. I really don't know.
We'll come back to that one. I'll sing you
something. Come back
something.
to that one. Theme from Star Wars. I don't.
All right. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Best piece of advice, and I hope this is something you would take. It was from Bruce Babbitt. And when I first ran for mayor, he told me, he said, think for a minute, every day in elected office, what you can do that will have an impact, not today or on the current issue, but 20 years from now or 30 years from now. And I really thought it was the best piece of advice I've ever heard, because you can get so caught up in the moment and the crisis of today, the crisis du jour, that it's very easy to forget that what you're doing is going to have an impact for generations to come. And you need to keep your eye on that ball, not on what is ever happening. Whatever's coming in over the transom is a distraction, because we're really elected for the long haul. And I think that's something I hope all elected officials will take seriously.
That's wonderful. I often have a conversation with people talking about where do we want to be in 20 years? And that's I say, where do we want to be as a state in 20 years? Let's decide on where we want our education system to be. Let's decide on what we want our prison system to be. We can't do it just today, but we can work towards that. And we can argue over how much or where the money's going to come. Wonderful. All right, here's a couple more. When you were a kid, what was your favorite meal growing up?
My favorite meal?
Meal. I love food, Terry.
Meal. Lamb chops, spinach, and raspberry sherbet.
Raspberry sherbet. Very nice. Okay, last one. Last two. Is there a restaurant that you're just kind of like ashamed to admit it you really like, and it's kind of, again, guilty pleasure? Is there a place that you go and just get bad food?
I used to do food reviews, and so I've got a few. Several of them are no longer in business. The one I'd like to single out is Mr. Mort's. I don't know if you ever remember 19th Avenue and Bethany. It had the best hot dogs, I think, big kosher hot dogs and sauerkraut in Phoenix. And unfortunately, it was sort of a family operation, and it's not around anymore. The one I love right now in downtown Phoenix is called 40301. Used to be right here in my Roosevelt neighborhood. They moved to across the street from the Phoenix Art Museum, but it's excellent Italian food. It's the real thing, and I encourage anybody. I think they're open again, so come to Forno.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, a serious question now, because Bob Gomez is going to donate to the campaign if I ask it, and I'm all about the Benjamin. So thank you, Bob, for your generous donation. That's Curlin23.com. He's asking, what was your greatest win as an elected official, or perhaps your greatest success? Two separate questions. You can choose to answer both or just one.
Oh, people usually ask about the most frustrating loss.
We're all about the positives.
Well, I have to say, our run way back in 1983 for mayor of Phoenix was pretty amazing. We were the outside candidate. Absolutely everybody who'd written us off as not having a chance in the world. Why in the world would I want to even try this? And we came through at the last minute and won the race. And I love the job as mayor. I think it's one of the great jobs in America. And that was a singularly exciting moment. My dad was quoted after the election because he didn't think it was going to work out. I know that. He never said that, but I know he didn't think so. But his comment after election night was, this wasn't a win, it was just a miracle.
Well, take that miracle. I think it's been a miracle for Arizona, how involved you've been and the legacy you're leaving behind. If there's a statue to go up at the Capitol or anywhere here in Arizona, I think it should be of you, Mr. Goddard.
Thank you. I just want to make the streets a little safer.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being on. It's been a real pleasure. I wish you well. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll get that dirty money outlawed and across the finish line.
One way or another. One of the benefits of being persistent is eventually you wear down the opposition and you can come across the finish line. And with as many people in Arizona as support full transparency, I know we're going to do it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This dog's going to catch the car. All right. Take care. You have a great Tuesday night. Thanks so much.
Good job, Kurt. Good luck.
All right.